Hi, I'm Pastor Susan Schwartz. Sort of as a way of introduction, I have been writing a little bit about myself for the newsletter. In February, I shared a bit about the first 30 years of my life. For March's newsletter, I wrote about my call story. This month, I want to tell you a little bit about the ministries in which I've been blessed to participate. I graduated from Trinity Seminary, Columbus in June of 1980. Two of the Lutheran Church bodies had just begun ordaining women in 1970, so I was one of the first. For some of the first women, the process was slow and difficult. Many of the early women interviewed with congregations many times and waited for a call. Sometimes the wait was for more than a year. I was fortunate in that I had a call in hand the day I graduated from seminary. The first church I served was as assistant pastor at a congregation located in the first ring suburbs of Chicago. Our Savior was a larger and growing congregation in the southwest part of metropolitan Chicago. The congregation had a history of working with interns and assistants, was wanting again to have another pastor on staff, and the senior pastor was open to working with the women, and the congregation was amenable as well. That I would be filling as an assistant position, and the openness of the senior pastor and the congregation was really what made it all happen for me. When the ELCA was formed in 1986, it became even easier for me and for other female pastors to receive a call. I was at Our Savior's Burbank for about 10 years, preached every other Sunday, taught various classes, ran with the Luther League, and participated in church and community organizations. In the first several years, I was the only female pastor in Chicago and all of Illinois. But in time, the number grew. I was very fortunate to have been asked by Pastor Earl Peters and Our Savior's to serve them for those 10 years. While Our Savior's was closer to Midway Airport, my second congregation was closer to O'Hare. Up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, New Life was a fresh congregation, just coming off mission status. The immediate neighborhood was about 10 years old, and many of the folks were middle management or business owners. Just down the street was the biggest church in the United States, Willow Creek Church. I served as solo pastor at New Life and was there about 6 years. In 1996, began one of the most challenging times of my years as a pastor. I was called to serve a congregation in the northwest part of Chicago. The congregation could no longer support a full-time pastor, so I was part-time. And Gladstone Park was part of a group of 10 congregations considering merging into one. Within a year, the pastor of Peace, another congregation that was in the merging process, moved to Pittsburgh, and that was Pastor Bruce Brunkhorst. And I became pastor of that congregation as well. Within another 6 months, I was serving as vice pastor for 2 other congregations. I could not preach at all of the churches on Sunday, so another pastor helped in the preaching, and I took responsibility for pastoral care and covering meetings. As the merging process continued, 4 congregations dropped out, and on Easter Sunday of 1998, the remaining 6 merged into United in Faith Lutheran Church on North Irving Park Avenue in Chicago. All 6 buildings were sold, and the new congregation bought and refurbished a small factory or storefront. I moved on to Resurrection Lutheran Church near O'Hare. I have a real affinity for those airports, where I served as an interim assistant pastor. After nearly 20 years in Chicago and taking a slight turn in the road, I sold my condominium and moved with 4 cats in tow to Pittsburgh. I've been accepted into the clinical pastoral education program at West Penn Hospital. CPE is the primary professional program beyond the 4 years of seminary for training chaplains, hospital and other. CPE includes classwork, homework, writing, and patient visitation. It is 40 hours per week. It was during this time at West Penn that I filled in for Pastor Kemp one Sunday morning. Chaplaincy doesn't always pay a lot, and sometimes one needs to be creative to make ends meet. So while at West Penn, I also served Little Eveline Lutheran Church in Friendship. In 2000, I was finished with CPE and hired as chaplain at the Children's Institute in Squirrel Hill. Not long afterwards, I resigned from Eveline. I was ready to give myself a little break, but was doing some pulpit supply again. Well, the break lasted a little while, and then I was approached by the Synod office about working with a pastor and trained layperson to supply worship and pastoral care services to 3 congregations in the Mount Washington, Mount Oliver, Carrick area. The goal was to help the congregations merge together. Well, Zion disbanded. Trinity Mount Oliver became part of Plum, and recently, because the building was in such disrepair, had to close. Within the last year, Redeemer disbanded and sold its body, its building. I have noticed, and I am sure that you have too, that the world is changing. The church is changing. And I'll talk about that more next month. And healthcare is changing too. Back in the first decade of the 2000s, there were some shifts at the Children's Institute, and I needed to find an additional source of income. I shared this with the bishop's office, and as it happened, Hope in Forest Hills, where I was living, was in need of a pastor. A couple at Hope had heard about my work at Trinity Mount Oliver and wanted to hear more from me. Actually, it was 2 congregations, one in Forest Hills and one in Swissvale, that together were beginning a new venture in life. We talked and figured out how to make it work, and I was back at a 60-hour week. I stayed at TCI and Hope in St. John through some more changes. The world was just not the same. TCI didn't need a chaplain now. St. John could never maintain its building, and Hope didn't have the funds for a full-time pastor. As an aside, I had worked a bit with a very small church in Hazelwood, and by the end of 2019, they disbanded because they didn't have the resources to stay open. I think there are some themes here in my story, and you may have heard them too. These themes have taught me many things and have formed me into the pastor I am today. But I'll talk with you a bit more about this next month.